A trauma bond is when you meet below the line. You think you're connecting out of fulfillment, but ultimately you're sacrificing expansion by meeting below the line. It's when you bond wounded inner child to wounded inner child. So both of you are in your wounded inner child, and you're bonding through the trauma of your wounds. Trauma bonding through pain. So a lot of people bond through the wounded part of their personality. The other trauma bond is when one person plays the role of the shadow and the other person plays the role of the victim or the wounded inner child. So that's shadow bonding with the wounded inner child. For instance, one person may be deeply and profoundly controlling adult, and the other person may play the frozen child. All trauma bonds are below the line. They're all in contraction. They're done through woundedness, or they're done through shadow, or a combination of both of those. The third trauma bond is shadow to shadow. Two people are both in their shadow. So you have a wounded to wounded trauma bond. You have a wounded to shadow trauma bond. Either one could play either role, and sometimes you can switch back and forth between those roles. And you have a shadow to shadow trauma bond, which is why I constantly say that it's very important to understand your conditioning, because if you understand your shadow and wounded tendencies, you're more likely to be able to identify where you will go below the line. When someone invites you to bond in a wounded way or in a shadow way, you don't have to accept it. We end up bonding with people in trauma bonds. It's out of familiarity, it's out of convenience, and it's out of habitual experiences. You mistake the bond of trauma with an individual as connection, but it's not real connection. It's in contraction, and it's not uplifting your relationship. You're connecting in a codependent trauma bond in this way, and one of you is playing one of those roles, and you want to look at what the ego gain is. Because even if you're in the role of the martyr or the victim or the wounded inner child, you're gaining something egoically. You are choosing to stay in that bond, and there's something that you do not want to do to empower yourself. It's more of what your collective patterning is, how conscious you are of your patterning, what familiar trauma bonds you've had in the past, and if you're replaying those trauma bonds with an individual because it feels familiar, it feels comfortable, and it feels normal, doesn't mean it's healthy.